Welcome back, everyone. In the last video, we learned about this new onAuth state change listener, which runs our callback whenever the auth state changes. So now what we want to do is we want to continue centralizing all the code related to authentication into just this one listener now. So in the last video, we modified our sign-in form so that our sign in with email and password no longer leverages that call to set current user. So here we can actually get rid of this set current user since we don't need it anymore. And similarly, we can also remove any imports that we're making to it inside of the sign-in form component. We know that in our sign up form, we do something similar. So we can also get rid of this because once again, when a user signs up, we are no longer leveraging our context here in order to actually make the update inside of the user context. So one nice advantage we get is that we have now stopped hooking into our user context from both the sign up form and the sign in form. So now whenever this context value updates, we don't need to rerun these functions needlessly. So automatically we get a little bit of a performance boost. Continuing on, we know that inside of our navigation, we are still also setting the user whenever a user signs out. So we actually don't need to do this anymore because again, the moment a user signs out, our auth state change listener is going to catch it. So all we really need is just to call sign out user whenever this link is clicked. So we can actually get rid of this sign out handler as well as this setter function. We do still need the actual current user though, because based on this value, we determine if we show the sign out link or the sign in link. So here, what we're saying is that, hey, whenever you sign out, I essentially want to still show the sign in link and respectively the reverse. And we actually still continue to get this benefit as long as we know what we're getting from this user. So we know that the user that gets passed through is either going to be an authenticated user object or it's going to be null. We get null when the user signs out. So we know that for us, what we want to store inside user context is either going to be null or it's going to be the user object. So essentially here inside of our use effect, we can just call our setter and set it to whatever that auth changed value is, because both these values will be the correct one for us. If a user signed out, we want to store null. If a user signed in, we want to store the object. So here, if we save this and we go back to our application, we'll see that right now our user is indeed signed in. So let me just also console log out the user just so that we can see and be very clear. So again, my map is going to reinitialize. We see that we have our user object because we're authenticated. And now if I sign out, I see that we get null. If I sign in again, we see that we have our user object and we see our navbar correctly reflects this change. So now we've pretty much centralized our sign out and sign in into this listener callback. Now we can actually take this isolation a step further. Inside of our sign in form, within our sign in with Google method, we are actually taking this user object that we get back from the authentication and we create a user document from this auth object. We can now move this into the user context. So I'm just going to cut this function and no longer need to destructure off the user. I'm going to go into my user context. And what I'm going to say is that I only want to create this user document if a user comes through. So here I want to say if user, then create user document from auth. So we want to import this from our Firebase utils. Otherwise, just set the current user. So this here is a method you might be wondering. Well, we're centralizing our auth, but maybe it's a user that's brand new when they sign in with Google, but maybe it's a user that already exists. Well, luckily for us, inside of our create user document auth object, we know that we get the snapshot, and the snapshot will dig into that place in the database given the UID we get from the auth, and it will determine whether or not, based on this object, if it exists or it doesn't exist. So if it doesn't exist, then we create a new instance in our database. If it does exist, then we skip this step altogether. Either way, we get back a valid user docref. So luckily for us, because of this pattern that we wrote, we actually now have this all working. So let's save this, go back to our application, and let's refresh. And now what I want to do is I want to first go into my CrownDB. I'm actually going to delete the user that I have from my Google sign-in, because here is actually the best way for me to prove that everything still works. So I'm going to delete that user. And inside of my authentication, I'm also going to delete this user, so that now when I go back to my application and I do my sign in with Google method, and here inside, I'm also going to use my user. We're going to go through that flow. We're going to authenticate my user. And what I should see, if I refresh this, is I see my user. And also, more importantly, inside of Firestore, I see the user that just got created right here for my Gmail sign-in. So as you can see, everything is still working. But luckily for us now, we have actually centralized the majority of the code that has to do with the authentication into one easy to track place inside of the context that is supposed to manage it in the first place. So this is a great thing that we've managed to do, because now anytime we need to think about authentication, most of the actual logic placement all lives within this user provider now. The only place where we kind of can't do that is with sign up. We still need to create the user doc from here. And the reason why we need this is because we need this display name. There are other ways that we can actually move this so that we can continue to leverage the actual listener for this as well. But this is one place where, you know what, it's not that bad for us to do. We need to leverage some fields sometimes from this actual sign up form itself that we need in order for our database to have the up-to-date value. So it's not the worst thing to do, but at the very least, the majority of our code is now centralized in the user context. So in the last few lessons, we've learned how to utilize this new context in order for us to store some data that our entire application needs to keep track of. In this particular case, it was the user. What we've also learned to leverage is this user context pattern in order to centralize code that's related to the user and authentication. So just by learning context, we've actually managed to find a good way to centralize and clean up our architecture of our React application. This user context governs the domain of everything related to users and authentication and the storage of those users. So now that we've done this, let's move on to the next video.